Hello and welcome to DHubMT YouTube channel podcast brought to you by the European Digital Innovation Hub and powered by MDIA, Malta Digital Innovation Authority. Our guest speaker today is Professor Gordon Patch. He holds a position of a computer science professor at the University of Malta. And his research focuses primarily on the verification of computer systems, ensuring that they work correctly. Welcome. How are you, Profs? Okay?
Fine, thanks for the invitation.
I know obviously you've been doing this for quite a number of years, but what personal experiences or factors have led you to choose such a career in this specific field, which is computer science, and particularly in the area of software verification?
So, my initial interest was that of mathematics. I loved mathematics, I wanted to study mathematics, and back in the late 80s I started a degree in mathematics and computing because I wanted to do a degree in mathematics. By the end of the degree I realized that there were various mathematical aspects and logical aspects to computer science that I was fascinated with, and I was actually fascinated with those aspects of mathematics more than the mathematics itself, which led me to continue working in the field. And back in the 90s particularly, the idea of verifying software, ensuring that software works correctly, was very much a mathematical field, where researchers were working on mathematical techniques to model computer systems in the same way a physicist would model any physical object, or in the same way that an engineer would model a bridge to ensure that the bridge does not collapse. So the first step would be to model that using mathematics. So that was my introduction to software verification, to system verification. And my research then led to that because obviously it was a good application area of mathematics, a good application area of logic, and the mathematical side of computers, of computing, that what fascinated me initially. Over the years, I became more interested in the practical applications of these techniques, of these tools, but I still love the mathematical underlying foundations of the area.
It's very beneficial, I think, that we understand what we mean by software verification. And adding on to that, I would ask you to maybe perhaps share with us the key regulations and standards for software assurances, both in Malta and the European Union, because I think it's very important for us to understand this.
Indeed. Perhaps I can start with a little bit of history. So I was mentioning the 90s, where people were still experimenting with what can be done to verify that systems work correctly. Back in the 90s, there were a number of huge disasters because of computer systems that failed. For instance, Intel had a chip that did not compute certain types of division correctly, which meant that they had to recall all the chips back to the factory to replace them. It cost them a huge amount of money. Same thing, some the viewers who are old enough might remember the Ariane 5 rocket explosion in the 95, I believe, or 94, which was a direct result of software which failed, a mistake in the software. And there were cases, for instance, even of radiation machines overdosing cancer patients because of a bug in software. So people started realizing that ensuring that software works correctly is very, very important. Initially, it was a push more from the industry itself because they realized, especially the large players, that if they don't deliver correct systems, it will cost them. It will cost them a lot of money. And over the years, there were various stories. I mean, these were three of the most high-key stories, but there were various others, including in financial trading and various other domains where companies lost a lot of money because of this. So there was a lot of effort in trying to ensure that systems are built in a way that they work correctly, or at least they try to ensure as much as possible, because we can never be 100% sure, obviously, because of the complexity of software, that they work correctly.
And how is this done? I'm curious, how does Malta and the EU ensure the quality and the security of a software used in critical sectors? As you mentioned, there's health, there's finance, transportation. How is this ensured?
Indeed. So then we saw the shift into regulation. So we saw regulation and requiring that software systems work correctly in some way, that they are checked in some way or another, they are audited, they are assessed to ensure that at least the correct level of due diligence to ensure that the system works correctly has been carried out. And we first saw it in the more critical areas, as you mentioned. You mentioned health, for instance. Health regulations were amongst the first that included the requirements on software. Avionics was another field that required this early on. And over time, we are seeing more and more of this being enforced at a regulatory level. So nowadays, we're seeing a lot of this, for instance, in the financial sector, with fintech solutions requiring certain audits, certain software audits, to ensure that the systems work correctly. And the way this is typically done, since there is no tool that can tell you yes or no, right? Because it's even a question of what the software does. The software does so many different things. It's not just a bridge where you just want to ensure that it can withstand a certain number of cars, but it's more complex than that. So the approach is typically that there is a third party, independent third party, which audits the software or that assesses the software to ensure both that the software works correctly and that the process is in place. For instance, to build the software, for instance, what happens if a problem is found, or what processes are in place to ensure that it is rectified in a timely manner, that users are notified in the right way, that user assets are protected, etc. In Malta, I had seen this arise in this field back in 2018 when the blockchain and DLT, distributed ledger technologies legislation came through, which was very innovative at the time, the idea that the software systems were to be audited, were to be assessed. In this way, any users of a certified blockchain solution, certified in Malta, would have the peace of mind that the software was not just built by any kid in their garage with no due diligence, with no assurances that the software works correctly, but also it has undergone rigorous testing, rigorous analysis, and has the right framework to ensure correctness.
As you rightly said, so we hear a lot about the importance of the new technologies coming in through, and AI and blockchain and this and that. It's more we're promoting all the new technologies, but we rarely discuss software. Why do you think it lacks such importance when you put the two together?
Mm-hmm. Indeed. So we hear a lot about the application areas. So we hear a lot in the news about AI. We hear a lot about IoT. We hear
the
a lot
excitement factor.
Exactly. Back in 2018, it was blockchain. And things change. Digital twins, things changing all the time. The thing is, with software verification, it's a horizontal. It cuts right across all these. Right? It's a foundational technique. It's a foundational tool. It's a tool to ensure that any other technology works correctly, and that is the big challenge, right? It's not something that is facing the end user, but it is the assurance that the end user gets. It's in the same way that you could think of testing for the safety of a car. It's not something that the end user will experience directly, but they should be, wary about what tests were done on a car. Nowadays, in the automobile industry, you've got regulations that ensure that certain tests were done. But before that, or if that were not in place today, the end user should be interested in that safety. But yet again, they typically would know nothing about test dummies, what speeds they are tested in, how they're tested. So this is why we don't hear about software verification. But it's a crucial part of what we do today, especially since so much of our life is spent on digital devices, and we trust these digital devices, sending messages about our health, sending messages about our work, sending messages about all aspects of our lives.
Without being aware about the verification of the software.
Indeed, exactly. So you never know whether an email you're sending, we can take the very simplest software tool that everyone uses, right? We all send emails. But how do you know that the email you send to a customer or to a client is not sent to a competitor in the field because of a bug in the software? So even the simplest of software has certain things that are very important to be checked, let alone the more important areas where perhaps, one is using an internet banking application, one is using a health application. How do I know that my health information?
Data.
Exactly, sensitive data. Sensitive computation, we would want to be sure that these do work correctly.
Rightly so. What initiatives or program exists to support research and development in software verification technologies within both Malta and the European Union level?
So I would separate the research and pushing forward the techniques, making the techniques more widely usable and making them more scalable to be applied to larger systems, for instance. And there we find a lot of programs both at the EU level and locally, which focus on financially supporting research projects, both academic and industry-based research projects. So we see those types of programs that fund this sort of thing. And we're seeing that since new regulations are coming in place, for instance, the new AI Act, which regulates how AI will be deployed within the EU, there is a huge emphasis on software auditing, software verification, with the idea of a sandbox within which AI systems should reside, certain types of AI systems should reside, to ensure that they work in a safe manner and that they are built in a safe manner. So what we're seeing now is the rise also of support programs in order to ensure that compliance with such new regulation is feasible, especially for the small players, right? Small startups, SMEs, micro enterprises, where the burden of verification can be high in terms of percentage of their yearly annual investment, for instance.
Are there any guidelines or maybe best practices for software verification and quality assurance that companies operate within Malta and the EU and that they should adhere to?
So there are lots of standards out there of different processes, of different ways things should be done, and there are a lot of, they are usually typically built on a best practice approach. And as I was saying earlier on, until recently, it was mostly the industrial players choosing which ones are more appropriate for them. What we're seeing now is because of the shift in compliance in the software regulations that we're seeing nowadays, we're seeing that countries are adopting certain standards which are obligatory if you want to either operate using certain technology, or if you want to actually certify a system within that jurisdiction. So we're seeing certain standards being adopted or adapted according to the need.
And these are standards, they're not law enforced.
It depends. Typically, for instance, let's take the example of Malta. Let's go back to the 2018, because that was one of the first fully deployed, fully rolled out systems, regulatory systems that ensures that things go through a systems audit. So what we saw there was that the law identified the need for a systems audit, but left it up to, in this case, the MDIA, the authority, to identify guidelines in terms of what control objectives are to be checked, what things are to be verified, what things are to be ensured that they are in place for the audit to pass. So essentially, in that case, what happened was that the guidelines was like the syllabus in an exam.
You have to
and
follow.
It was exactly, and obviously also because this is a big challenge, right? Because technology changes fast and law changes slow.
You hit it right on the head.
So one has to be very careful when one regulates technology that one is not too specific, because things get old very quickly. And law will not be able to keep up with the needs of technologies as it evolves, as it changes over time.
Examples obviously help us understand better. So if I had to ask you to share examples of successful projects or case studies related to software verification and assurances in Malta and the EU, could you highlight their impact and outcome?
Yes. So let's start with locally. I mean, I was involved in a number of projects, for instance, looking at the fintech field, looking at financial transactions, ensuring that they work correctly. And these are the sort of things that obviously when you have systems that handle huge amounts of money on a daily basis, any small mistake can be very, very costly. Can mean, the end of a small company because of an error that is in place. So there was substantial work being carried out in the area of blockchain, when once again there was the focus on the technology. We saw a number of companies actually verifying what were called smart contracts back then here locally. Abroad, there are various other success stories that one can talk of, one can speak of. And they vary a lot. I mean, back in the 90s, I mentioned the Ariane 5 rocket that exploded. Back in the 90s, I was involved in one project where we were actually verifying the software and the hardware of the Ariane 5 rocket. And we were one of the teams that identified some of the problems that were there.
That's very satisfying to identify.
It is. To tell the engineers, oh, you were wrong.
Yes, it's a mistake. I found it.
Luckily, I wasn't on the side of the engineers. But it was a huge effort across the whole EU. So where different teams in different countries were analyzing the software and the hardware and actually found various problems back there, which meant that future missions could be safer. But we saw the same thing happen in health. We saw the same sort of success stories in the financial sector, in various applications in the area of privacy and data, ensuring that data does not leak out. So we're seeing a lot of this sort of stuff on a daily basis. What the difficulty in publicizing these success stories is that if you successfully verify a system to a sufficient degree, then you get no problems. So you have nothing to publicize. So unlike if I teach someone to drive so well that they do not have any accident, there's no story to tell there.
So many times mistakes are important.
Mistakes are what make the story, exactly. And lack of mistakes, however, are the real story behind the success of these technologies.
As a concluding comment from your end and also a way forward, do you believe that initiatives like DHubMT powered by MDIA will have a significant impact also in software verification? And maybe what do you foresee in this area as well?
Indeed. So I think the initiative is very, very useful, particularly, I mean, the idea of not only having a hub for startups to be hosted there, but even more so with the idea of having the sandbox approach, which ensures that the growth of the technology is done in a way that it is assessed and reviewed on a regular basis. I think that is key and directly related to the verification side of things. Obviously, then there's also the high-performance computing side of things, which is very interesting, both as a technology which ensures that we can do verification at a faster rate, so it's a tool for software verifiers. But it's also interesting because these tools require certain complexity, which means that there is a higher incidence of errors, a higher incidence of bugs, a higher incidence of problems arising, which means that we have to be there to verify that the software works correctly.
Thank you very much for being with us in today's podcast. That was Professor Gordon Patch from the University of Malta, and thank you for watching.